Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our first day of online learning. So I just want to let you guys know that throughout the whole video process, you guys are going to be able to pause the video whenever you feel like you need to pause and analyze what we're talking about, rewind it to go back to something that I already mentioned, but you need a little refresher, or you can just fast forward so you can just practice the problems that we have. Remember that you also need to be taking notes, and I would like you guys to send me a picture of the notes that you guys are taking so that I can count it as classwork grade. So let's begin. Today we're going to be talking about probability. So our goal is to be able to use ratio to find the probability of simple events so that I can determine the likelihood of an event happening. So two things that we're going to be focusing today is to be able to find simple events, and then we're going to be analyzing the likelihood of those simple events from happening. So just remember that we're going to be focusing on two things: simple events and likelihood. And one of the things that I wanted one of the things that I want us to be able to remember is the word ratio here, which I put here. Remember that a ratio is just a fraction. So just by looking at this, I can kind of like say, okay, ratio, then we're going to be using fractions again. So yes, this lesson, we're going to be using fractions to be able to get simple events. And then we're going to be analyzing likelihood of those events happening. So let's go over some of the definitions. So what is probability? It is a measure of how likely an event is to occur. Now, what is an event? An event is one outcome or a collection of outcomes. And outcomes are the total possible results. Okay, so probability is written down in a form of a fraction. Remember that in the goal today, I mentioned the word ratio because a ratio is basically a fraction that compares two things. To find probability though, we're going to be using a fraction in the following format. The probability of an event is equal to the number of ways that event can occur over the total number of outcomes. One way that I like to remember this is that probability is the number of possible outcomes that you want over the total number of possible outcomes. Okay, so in any math problems, probabilities can be written three different ways. So we already know that one of the ways is in form of a fraction. Now, these fractions, they're going to be simple fractions from 0 to 1. What that means is that we are not going to be getting an answer that has a mixed number. So we do not want any mixed numbers. They're going to be just regular fractions, such as 1/4, 3/5, 1/2. And from here, then I can say, well, if I can get an answer in form of a fraction, then I can also make that answer a decimal. Because remember that every fraction can be turned into a decimal. So these will be possible answers that we may get. And from a fraction, we can always go and turn anything into a percent. So in class, if you can recall from our lesson that we did in class before, we were able to take a decimal, move it 2 places to the right so that we can turn that decimal into a percent. So here are some examples of percent. And I just want to take this one. I have 2500s here. And these are the equivalency to 2500. 1/4 equals to 2500s, which equals to 25%. Okay, so let's practice some of the probability problems that we have in this lesson. So the first one says, you randomly draw a marble from a bag of marbles that contains 3 blue marbles, 4 green marbles, and 5 red marbles. And what we need to solve is, what is the probability of drawing a blue marble? Listen how I'm reading my question. What is the probability of drawing a blue marble. So what that means is when I reach into this bag and I grab a marble out, what are my chances of getting a blue one? So to solve this, I'm gonna check out how many blue marbles there are in this bag. So there is a total of 3 blue marbles, and that's my event. I want my event to be blue marbles. So I have 3 blue marbles over the total number of marbles that are in that bag. So the total number of marbles in that bag is 12 marbles. So my probability is 3 out of 12. This simplifies to 1/4. And now we want to turn that into a decimal. Now, not always the answer is going to be asked as a decimal form, but in this case, they do ask the answer to be given in form of a decimal. So we need to turn this fraction into a decimal, and 1/4 as a decimal equals to 25 hundredths. And for those people that need a little reminder how we do this, so I'm going to be doing it here on the side. So to turn a fraction into a decimal, we divide the top number divided by the bottom. So top divided by bottom number. So my top is 1/4. Since I want to make this into a decimal, I'm just going to set it up right away by adding a decimal and 2 zeros. 4 goes into 1, 0 time. Bring up my decimal. Into 10, 2 times. And I'm just going to quickly follow here my procedure of dividing. So that tells me that 1/4 equals to 0.25. So that will be my answer here. Now I want you guys to think about, what if this was asked to give the answer as a percent instead? So as a percent, all I have to do now is move the decimal 2 places to the right. So the decimal will be in front of the 5, so that will make it 25. And I'm just going to add my percent sign. So 3 forms that I have here. I have my percent, I have my decimal, and I have the answer as a fraction. Okay, let's practice another exercise. Okay, so let's practice this exercise. So this one says, Cam cannot figure out what to eat. He's going to randomly select a piece of fruit from the pantry. There are 5 apples and 5 bananas in his pantry. What is the possibility of selecting an apple? So again, I'm going to start with my fraction form. The event, which is in here, this is the event, this is what I want to happen, is to get an apple. That's what I want my event to be, to get an apple. So how many apples there is in the pantry? There are 4 apples over the total number of fruits. So the total number of fruits in this case are 9 fruits. So my probability of getting an apple is 4 out of 9. The answer again, they want it in form of a decimal. So what do I need to do? I need to divide my top number, which is 4, divided by 9, and I'm going to make this into a decimal right away. Remember that they want the answer to be in 2 decimal places, so we might need to be rounding in this situation. So let's work this out. 9 does not go into 4. I'm going to bring up my decimal. 9 goes into 40 4 times. So I have 40 again. 9 goes into 40 4 times, and I can definitely see a pattern here. Something is happening. If you guys notice, I'm having kind of like the same problem. 40 take away 36, 40 take away 36. So what that is telling me is that this might be repeating. And yes, it is repeating. So I'm gonna stop it here because there's no point of me continuing this, especially because they want the answer to be given in 2 decimals. So since they want it in 2 decimals, I'm gonna underline my 2 decimals that I have here, and I'm gonna look to the right of it. So I'm gonna underline, look to the right. Am I gonna round up or leave it the same? Well, remember the rounding rules. 5 or more, we're gonna bring this up by 1. Less than 5, we're gonna leave it the same. So we're gonna let it rest. So this is gonna be 0.44 as my final solution. Now I have my fraction form, my decimal form. What will be the percent form to this? So to get the percent form, remember that all I have to do is just move my decimal 2 places to the right. So the decimal is going to come here in front of that 4. So I'm going to drop the 0 because I don't need it. So my percent form will be 44%. So there is a 44% chance that I can get an apple. As a decimal form, 44 hundredths, and as a fraction form, 4 out of 9 chances of getting the apple. Okay, let's work on 2 more exercises, and then we're gonna be checking the likelihood of those events happening, because remember that we also need to determine today, what are the likelihood of some events happening? Okay, so let's try this too. So this one says, if you spin the spinner here, what is the probability of not getting a squirrel? So I do not want a squirrel. So that means that I'll be okay getting a caterpillar, a rabbit, a raccoon, or a ladybug. I do not want a squirrel. So I'm gonna X that out. And this will make my probability okay. So what are the chances of getting every other animal that's here except for the squirrel? So I have 4 chances of getting an animal that is not a squirrel out of 5 chances of, out of 5 total possible outcomes. So my event is 4. I want 4 animals that are not squirrel, and the total is 5. So what is this as a decimal? 4/5. I want you guys to do that on your own now. You may do it on the side, grab a calculator. You're going to be dividing 4 divided by 5. Okay, when you get this, you will be getting this decimal. Now, I know that the answer here says that they want the answer to be to 2 decimal places, which I'm going to leave it like that. But remember that this can also be given like this. Now, I want you guys to think about why the answer can also be given like this. And maybe we can talk about this later on in our life. Now, I'm giving you the answer in form of a fraction, in form of a decimal. Now, what is this as a percent? So we're going to talk about also that later on in the life. What is that as a percent? Remember that for the percent, all I have to do is just move that decimal 2 places to the right and add my percent sign. Okay, let's take a look at example number 2. Now, if I spin the spinner, what is the probability of getting a beaver? So I want the beaver. What I do not want is these other 2. So how many beavers are in the spinner? There's only 1 out of 3 animals that are here. So 1/3. So again, 1/3 as a decimal. What is 1/3 as a decimal? You can do this with a calculator, or you can do this, the way that we've been doing it in class. You go 1 divided by 3. The answer to that is going to be this non-repeating decimal, meaning that that decimal is going to be going on forever and ever and ever without ending. So 1/3 is about 33 hundredths. I want the decimal to be to 2 places, so I want 2 places. I'm going to look to the right. Is that decimal going to go up, or is it going to stay the same? In this case, it's going to stay also the same because this 3 here is less than 5. So I have my decimal, my fraction, and I say percent. Just remember, all I have to do is move it 2 places to the right. So this has an equal percent of 33%. So those are my chances here. Again, I start with my fraction form, and from there I turn it into a decimal, and from a decimal to a percent. Okay, so now let's talk about the likelihood. Remember, in the goal today, besides having or finding the event of something happening, we also want to find out what is the likelihood of that happening. So let's talk about likelihood right now, and we're going to talk about 3 different likelihoods. So the first one is, if an event is certain to happen, then the probability of that event is 1 or 100%. If an event will never happen, then the probability of the event is 0 or 0%. If an event is just as likely to happen as to not happening, then the probability of that event is 50%. So let's make this a little more clear. So when we work in getting the probability of an event happening, we usually start with a fraction, like I said. So let's assume that our fraction kind of like ended up somewhere here. So this is where somewhere over here the fraction ended up. That means that the probability of that event happening was very likely. The closer it gets to the 1 whole, then we have 100% of that happening. 100%, remember that you want the fraction to be, for example, 3 over 3. 3 over 3 equals to 1. That means that for sure that is going to happen. If it's either anything less than that, then it's just likely to happen. Something gives you something that is 1/2. That means that it can happen as much as it cannot happen. If we get something like around the 1/4, then the chance of it happening is very unlikely. Something that will give an event where the numerator is 0 over any number, like 0 over 5. That means that it's never going to happen, so it's an impossible event. So let's talk about these things. I'm going to go back and show you some of those examples. So let's go back to the one that we have done already and check out what is the likelihood of those things happening. So I'm just going back over here. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. What is the likelihood that I'm going to get an animal? So what is the probability of getting an animal? Well, every time I do the spinner, what am I going to get? An animal. So there is 3 animals out of 3. So this equals to 1. So that is a probability that we call certain, meaning that for sure that is going to happen. Now let's take a look at this one over here. What is the probability that I'm going to get a human if I spin this? So if I spin, can I get a human? No. So the probability will be 0 out of 5. So what do we call this probability here? We call it impossible. It just doesn't happen. It's not possible for it to happen versus something that it can definitely happen. We call it certain. Now, anything that's in between a 1 or a 0, then we're going to call them unlikely, very likely, likely to happen based on where do they land basically on this chart. So let me erase this again. Okay, again, so something that for sure will happen is called certain. It will not happen. It's impossible. If it's like 1/4, about 1/4, it's unlikely to happen. It can happen, but it's a little unlikely. Something that passes the 3/4 fourth line is likely to happen. If it's around here, it's kind of like it has an equal chance of happening. Maybe there's three apples, 3 bananas. And what are the chances of getting an apple? 3 out of 6. So it has an equal chance of getting an apple and a banana in either one of the cases. Okay, so let's practice that, the probability, the likelihood of some probabilities. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. So it says, for each bag below, describe the likelihood of picking a white marble. So what is the chance of me getting a white marble here? So let's analyze this. How many white marbles there are in this bag? So there's 2 white marbles out of the total number of marbles. So the total number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 sevenths. So is this something kind of like that is in the middle of it? Is it something impossible, likely? First of all, is it impossible? No, it's not impossible because there are blue marbles. So I'm going to eliminate that choice. Is it for sure that I'm going to get a marble, a white one? No, it's not for sure because there are other colors there. So now let's think about the chances of me getting a marble. Is it likely or unlikely? So 2 sevenths. 2 sevenths is closer to less likely for it to happen. It's less than 1/4 or closer to 1/4. So I'm going to say that this is very kind of like unlikely for it to happen. Let's take a look at number 2. Number 2, what is the chance of me getting a white marble here? So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 out of 7. Now I can eliminate 2 things here again. I can eliminate the impossible. It's not impossible because there are some white marbles there. So there is a chance that I can get some. I'm going to eliminate certain because, again, not all marbles here are white. So I'm going to choose between these 2. And if you notice from here to this one, there's more likelihood of getting a white one here because there's more white than over here. So this one has a more likely possibility of getting it. And that makes sense. There are actually more white marbles in this bag than there are in this one. Now let's analyze the next one. The next one says, same thing. What is the chance of the probability of picking a white marble? Now this one we can definitely see that it doesn't matter how many times we go into that bag, I'm always going to be grabbing a white marble. So it is for sure. So when it's for sure that I'm going to get a white one, we call that certain. Okay guys, so that is it for today. Now your job is to go into ALEKS and practice some of the problems that are on ALEKS. Let me see how it goes, and we're going to be meeting later on in our live.